So now we're going to go through and scroll through the chats real quick to see what we can find there. But we are now opening into the official Q&A section of the class. So if people want to hop on audio and video and speak their questions out loud as well, or give feedback, then that's totally cool. We're perfectly fine with that. If we end up stumped on anything, I know we have some veteran brewers here as well, and we are more than happy to have their input on it. And once we're done with classes that are specific, questions that are specific to this class, we're also going to open up for just general questions about anything in brewing. And we're going to have some for the brewers who are on the chat as well. Because we have, we've been doing this for 2 years, but we still have a lot of questions of our own. We still feel like we're just getting started. So, yeah. So where did my phone? Phone's right here. That's right.
Actually, if I can go ahead and start out, sizing up and down the recipe, are there any specific ingredients that you need to really measure out?
Yes, so in terms of scaling, until you hit massive industrial scale, you're just going to be doing a linear size up, because just about anything that you need is based on a drink for drink basis or a cell by cell basis. And you're going to try to reach those same proportions either way. When you hit above 100 gallons, then you end up with different requirements for the yeast, and your nutrient blend will be a little bit different. And the sheer distance between the top and bottom in the fermenter makes the fermentation act differently there, so you have to make some adjustments. But if you're just going between a 1 gallon and a 5 gallon, or even up to a 15 or a 20, you're pretty much at the same. Okay. So just about everything that we did here will end up about the same when you scale up. The biggest difference will be your equipment. Larger equipment requires different tools. You go grab the brewing spoon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when you're working with a 1 gallon set, you can even work with a 1 gallon bucket. You can take yourself a little like silicone spoon, like the green one we got over there, and do all your stirring with that. In fact, that's what we used with our 3 gallon conical. But when you're working with a 5 gallon bucket or a 5 gallon conical, you need yourself a long ass spoon so that you can reach the bottom. So that'll be there. When you're in that size, you can't really shake your material to oxygenate it, or even with our 3 gallon conical, we can't shake that. The top isn't set up right for it. It come right through the airlock. So we have to stir like hell, and you can get a specific tool for it, or just get yourself a big spoon and whip the hell out of it and mix oxygen in from the air while you're there. So the actual mechanical things that you will do to it will be different, but the chemical and biological processes will be the same.
But because for this recipe specifically, there is no measurements, it's all kind of just hand wavy. It'll never taste the same for any batch will never taste the same. I might have added more raisins and yeast than you, so it's just kind of
yeah. And especially when we're doing a nitrogen and micronutrient starve batch, things become very dodgy, because the amount of minerals in each type of honey is different, and the amount of available minerals and nitrogen from the raisins is highly variable depending on, like, I don't know how clear it was. There are yeast completely surrounding every one of these. These are caked with yeast. These are the worst raisinets ever. I'm sorry, I'm way too pleased with that joke already. So the amount of nutrients that those yeast can access is dependent on how many yeast cells die in a way that the other yeast cells can't get to them, in addition to just how many raisins are in there and their general surface area and their size. And so because it's very dependent on how fast they run out of these nutrients, it could end up anywhere. If you're going for a sugar starvation fermentation, which is a dry fermentation, which is where they go until either they've made enough, they've got rid of enough sugar that they can't find anything to eat, or they've made so much alcohol that they can't survive in the liquid anymore because they're poisoning themselves with the alcohol. Then as long as you have enough nutrients, then it's fine. So you get to control the sugar levels, which you can check with your SG and your weights going in and be a lot more precise with. So sugar starvation or full fermentations are a lot more reproducible. This one, not really.
Thanks. I have a question about adding flavors. You said usually it's best to add them after you're done aging and before you bottle.
Yes.
How do you keep environmental contaminants from your your flavorings from contaminating your mead and restarting fermentation?
That is a very good question, and that will depend entirely on which flavorings you're adding. So if you're adding in dried ingredients that have been kept in relatively clean conditions, like say cinnamon sticks, which the base oils in cinnamon are antiseptic, and it's in a functionally no moisture environment, then you're only looking at mild potential mold input. And so if you keep your cinnamon relatively clear, your amount of microbial input is going to be very, very low. But if you're adding in fresh oranges, then you have a major problem because those are full of liquid, they're full of microbes. And so when you're doing those, what you need to do is you need to pasteurize your base, what you're adding in. You need to make sure that it is clean inside and out. And you can do this by home pasteurization. You get a pot, you put all your oranges in effectively a sous vide bag, something sturdy. You mash them up as best you can. You get the pot up to 160. You wait until the oranges come up to at least 160 and everything in them dies. And it'll cook the oranges a little, but not too much, and you'll be okay. Or you go online and you get yourself an aseptic fruit puree, and you go to a company that has effectively sludged them already, got them down, blended it through, and then put it through a commercial pasteurizer, which allows it to get to 160 for a fraction of a second, which won't allow cooking to happen, but still kills off all the microbes. And that leaves you with a material that won't end up killing you. This is the mistake that we made with the berries for the mixed berry cider, is that we thought that the freezing would be enough, and it wasn't. And so that ended up biting in the ass. We could have corrected for this by, after we bottled, we could have pasteurized it in the bottle, because it was a capped cider as opposed to a corked mead. If you pasteurize mead in a corked bottle, it would just shoot the cork off. But we could have pasteurized it then and we wouldn't have had a problem. But we'd originally just planned on kegging. It was meant for an event that was going to happen like a week after we were done with it, and then COVID happened, so we had to bottle it as an afterthought, and so we didn't really consider the pasteurization aspect of it. So you have to pay attention every time. For most things that you'll be adding, making sure that things are clean and dry will be enough. But anything that has any kind of biological activity to it naturally, like it is still alive or was alive recently enough that you can tell, then effectively you got to pasteurize it or hope. Sometimes you just won't get a fermentation, but note that anytime that you add that to it, there is a chance that there will be a problem. But if you add, like, we know someone who does chocolate syrup, like Hershey's chocolate syrup, to make chocolate mead, and you can just pour that right in, no problem, because it comes in a sealed container. Just make sure you start with a fresh bottle and not one that's been sitting in your fridge for a month that you've opened up 12 times and let all the air in, and you're good. Anything that comes straight out of a package that was shelf stable, you're good.
How do you add the aromatics? Do you just like put them in like a big tea bag and then put them in the thing, or?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna go grab.
Okay.
Cheesecloth.
Yeah, you can use cheesecloth and make your own cheesecloth bags, and that's really useful for larger ingredients. But anything that's smaller and closer to a powder, what you do is you go to an Asian market and you get these soup bags. These are effectively giant tea bags that are meant to be filled at home for putting large ingredients in soup, so you can remove it and make broth without having to put it through a strainer. And these are phenomenal for putting large dry ingredients like cinnamon and anise and anything else, lemon peels and orange peels, just straight in. And then you don't have to worry about them coming up into your tube when you're bottling. And then you have that one bottle of mead with something floating in it, and you hope it's something that you put there. So these are great, and they cost like $1 for I don't know how many are in here because I don't read Korean, but I think it's Korean.
I want to say those are usually in packs of 10.
Most likely. We haven't finished a pack yet, so.
No. Oh.
Yeah.
If you're pasteurizing aromatics, I know there's a lot of aromatics that are very temperature sensitive, like rose and your floral scents. Do you find that there's an issue with those flavors changing before and after you pasteurize?
We don't, because when we pasteurize our aromatics, we make a tea out of them. For our rosemary, we make a rosemary tea, and because it just barely hits 160 and it's cushioned by water, you don't end up with major degradation. You would end up with problems with those if you were heating those directly on a pan, because the surface temperature would end up so much higher, but you don't tend to have major degradation until you reach above 200 degrees Fahrenheit. for most. Some burn earlier. Again, it's ingredient dependent. Everything's different for everything. 'Cause food is complex. There's so many different things happening in every different component that you're adding. But yeah, for our rosemary tea, we don't notice any kind of difference when we just brew up the rosemary and dump it in. We'll do like a quart of water for an ounce of rosemary and get plenty of flavor with no degradation.
And you just add the whole thing into 5 gallons, or?
Yeah, that one's for our rosemary cider. We do about a quart of water and an ounce of rosemary at the beginning for pre-fermentation. And then afterwards, we brew up another batch of the same proportions and add that in our array as needed.
Okay.
Yeah, but that amount was determined by, that was the first thing we tried and it worked out about right. So we're using that as our standard. I can't give you proportions on anything else, but if you go onto brew forums, you can find people who've worked with specific ingredients who will have, I use this much for this and it worked out okay. And that'll give you a ballpark that you can start working from.
Okay.
Also, you mentioned rose as one of them. Rose is going to be very difficult to make a tea out of safely. So I honestly recommend just buying rose water. It'll come in sanitized and you'll have the same flavor in and out, you know, for certain.
Okay. All right, thank you.
When you do the rosemary tea and you say you have an ounce, are you using, just a cut rosemary from your garden, or using an extract, or what are you using there?
We usually buy from the store, fresh cut in the little packs, just because it's easier. We had for a while a giant rosemary plant out front, but we weren't certain what was on it. Just because out in the world, especially near a street, there could have been anything on it that will still come out in the tea. And we just decided it was easier to assume that something grown commercially would have slightly less. But you can totally do a collector from your garden. You know that if you brew it up to a tea at the right temperature, whatever it is that's biological will be gone. It's just a question of if you have like acid rain very often or a lot of smog in your area, stuff that would end up extracting into the water.
We lived right next to a highway, so it was kind of just, we'll spend $2 at HEB.
Yeah.
And you're putting just the tea in as the flavorant, not the entire plant.
Yes, and we did that because we wanted the flavor to be stable. Whenever you leave it in and keep it in, it's going to keep changing over time as more and more extracts from it. As McKay's recently made a rosemary cordial and left the entire thing and eventually reached the point where it starts pulling chlorophyll out and it starts to bitter. So if you want to just get the rosemary, the oil off the surface, then you make the tea, that's all you get, and then you don't have anything else coming through. Now, there's a lot of things where you might want to leave the whole thing in and just get as much as you can, and the deeper flavors are what you're looking for. And that's totally fine. You just need to know that that's what's going to happen before you go in so you don't get surprised.
Yeah. So like with orange peel, would you do the same thing, or would you put that in the bag and then go with the whole peel?
I would go with a dried orange peel, probably slightly baked to get it closer to pasteurized, and then would put that in a tea bag, and that way I could control how long it stayed.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to age it for a year, you might not want a year's worth of orange oil because you get to the bitterness of the zest pretty quick. But a month of orange peel or 2 weeks of orange peel should probably get all the flavor you want.
And you mentioned dried, so not just like peeling fresh oranges and then you know, pasteurizing those in a sous vide or something like that, or
if you pasteurize them, that'll still work out well. It's just it adds in a slight uncertainty, while a dried orange peel can take about as long to make and there's less uncertainty. Also, it's just a little easier, at least for me, to air dry it, but mostly you can buy dried orange peels.
And not I have a dehydrator, I think. Yeah, you know, could probably do that too.
I've dehydrated orange peels. It's not very difficult.
Right.
I've just done it in an oven myself.
Yeah, ovens work probably just as well if you keep them, I guess, at a low enough temperature, right?
Exactly. You just want to make sure you don't burn them, and even then, you'd add a very interesting flavor of burnt orange peel. That could be good.
It might be.
There's very few
nice
flavors in brewing. It's just making sure you get the flavor you want to get. And if you don't get it, you tell them that you wanted that flavor.
Isn't that the premise behind Guinness, right?
Yeah.
Burnt beer.
Yeah.
We failed, but it's good. Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, Bochet Mead, I'm sure happened by mistake. Just burnt the honey. Oh, well, it's drinkable.
Good question in the chat right now.
Could you essentially dehydrate any fruit for flavor? Yes. Any pretty much anything that won't kill you on its own, and even some that would if you can reduce the potency of it, will go fine in what you brew. Again, it's just going to be a different flavor depending on each thing and how you prepare it. But yeah, desiccation, and then especially if you can pasteurize after desiccation, there's really no reason unless eating that thing would kill you. Don't put in a large amount of nightshade, but even a little nightshade might work out well. The only thing you want to look for is anything that's going to spoil, because anything that has an inherent rancidity, as opposed to a thing that is made rancid by bacteria or other biological activity, you will end up with that rancidity in your end result. Oils are the most common cause of this, but there are a few other fruits that have compounds that will just break down on their own. I unfortunately don't have a list of them in my head. But anything that you've seen on a store shelf that has that flavor, you're probably fine.
Banana peels age themselves, same as avocados.
Yeah, because the actual not ethanol.
It's
banana,
oxidative decay.
whatever it is. Yeah, ethane, I think. But yeah, it produces internally even when dried, and you'll end up with rotten banana taste. Ethylene, thank you. Yeah. And so the end result will end up the way it would end up outside of the drink. However, you can do fresh banana, soak it in, and get a decent flavor that way, or get a high quality banana extract, not necessarily a candy extract that'll give you the old flavor, but like a proper Cavendish. Look in brewing extracts, especially the ones that come in bottles about that big. That's where you're going to find your real quality, and you can get actual flavors that will be stable.
Yeah.
Kind of a similar vein there. Would so a banana bush is not, it does not make any bananas. It just smells a lot like it. Similar flavor profile, you think?
Most likely. It depends on which part of the plant you would use and the concentration of the compounds. I'm assuming
maybe petals.
But petals, yeah. Yeah, that could work well. I'd have to check out that particular plant and its composition before I could tell you for certain. But I could definitely tell you that if you section out one bottle's worth of it and put some in a tea bag in there, you only waste a bottle if you're wrong.
Yeah.
So
enough try though. But it's the scent versus flavor.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the magnolia tree that smells like bananas?
I'm not entirely sure. I've always called it a banana bush. Same with my family. We just kind of have them around. I don't think it's a magnolia. Very small flowers on it. I'm used to magnolias having a bit bigger flowers.
Yeah, magnolias are big trees with flowers nearly the size of your head.
Yeah, no, these are like shrubs.
Yeah.
I think it would probably be good to actually identify that plant. A lot of plants have secondary chemicals that could potentially be toxic. So definitely identify that plant first.
Yeah, which actually goes into another question I have of self-sanitizing any plant. You think the tea process works on it, where it's just bring water to a steam, let the kettle whistle for a bit?
Yeah, as long as it gets the internal temperature up, you should be good. Anything that will be removing out liquid through steam will also be removing part of your flavor. Things that are water soluble will be leaving, which is why we like the tea process, because anything that's water soluble ends up in the water, and there you go. But that is a perfectly valid method. It just might end up slightly different than you want.
So let me ask, the process again that you guys go through for flavoring most often is that you go through your primary fermentation, you rack off maybe several times, right? And then you get it into its final aging container, where you leave it for however long, let's say a year, right? And then you're going to go to bottle it. How you flavor, how far before you bottle do you flavor? Or are you flavoring, as you bottle, or a month before?
Well, it actually depends. Right now we have a pumpkin cider that's in a keg. We can bottle it right now, but we found out that if we add some nutmeg and cinnamon to it, it tastes amazing. So we're gonna add that into the keg, shake it around, let it rest a bit, and then bottle. We have another way of.
When you say let it rest a bit, it's
Just
Like a
enough for it to
day?
sell. We're gonna let it do the aging in the bottle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have another method that we're gonna try. We're just gonna add the spice right into the bottle and then fill the bottle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one's purely experimental. Though. We have no idea how that one's gonna work out.
Yeah. So
In fact, we're trying our first experiment after this class. It's been sitting there for nearly a month now, with the cinnamon powder in the bottle with it, and we'll find out if it was way too much or not.
Is that something you're planning to drink kind of right away, or are you going to let it sit in the bottle for a while, or?
Probably mostly going to be drunk soon, just because it's a very small batch, and we'll probably end up only having 20 bottles of it, so that'll end up going out for tastings and whatnot pretty quick. But it's something that you could leave a long time, but it will change over time.
Right.
And even the stuff we do leave, our rosemary lemon cider that we made a while back, we still have some bottles of those in the fridge, and they taste different now, even after they've been bottled in the fridge for a year.
yeah.
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 So the more, I guess, the closer to the bottling process, the more it's going to change after the fact.
Yeah. But if it's something that is not inherent to change, like say adding a juice or something that's not going, that is already built to be stable even in a solution, then you will have less changes if you add it just before bottling, especially if you have it bottled under pressure, where any changes will be less likely to occur.
Yeah.
But that's just the way that we found that works best for us.
Yeah.
So
And we're still working out details.
yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, for our mead, we tend to drop the stuff that we want to add into the bottling bucket before we move it over, like that fast before.
Like just right then.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, we've also had other things, like we have a pomegranate cider right now where we added all the juice before fermentation. Our failure of a pumpkin coconut cider, we added in pineapple coconut cider. We added in the pineapple before bottling, pineapple juice, and forgot how easily pineapple pulp ferments. And we had bottle bombs, like touch the cap too hard and it would fly 30 feet away and hit the fence, bottle bombs.
Yeah.
So it's not always the best.
So I suppose that, and that's re-fermentation essentially, right? Where
Yeah, if we had pasteurized it immediately, we wouldn't have had the problem.
Okay. Pasteurize the bottle, like
Yeah.
like get the whole bottle up to 160 and
Just get a big pot, put a
Yeah.
bag in the bottom and set it down and
right.
60 for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, until the interior fully goes through, so the water around it will be about 5 to 10 minutes before it gets there. We can go into the full process later, but effectively you just wait for the temperature to come back up after you put the bottles in, and you'll know they're done. You move them aside.
So you're essentially water bath canning your bottles of cider.
Like a canning process. Yeah.
Which for small batches is fine, but even for 5-gallon batches is kind of a pain. We're working on a way on pasteurizing kegs at home, but it's hard to find a sous vide big enough for a price that's in our price range.
Interestingly, I would actually suggest, from my experience with sous vide meats, taking a cooler and just cutting a top out of it and putting the sous vide in it.
Yeah, sorry, for our vessel, that was more or less our plan. The problem is finding a circulator that can handle keeping 5 gallons of liquid up at that point, plus enough liquid around it to keep it warm. So we need a sous vide that's rated for at least 10 gallons. Most are rated for 5 at top.
Yeah,
that's higher than I think. I think I've been 5 gallons at most.
Yeah, I cooked a steak recently in a cooler because the steak was too big for any container that I had to sous vide.
We had one of those. I think it's like a 2 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, whatever brand cooler, Coleman probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's holding 10 gallons, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so yeah, that's just a thing we've been working on. And I mean, we could get ourselves a turkey cooker. And put a giant gumbo pot on top and just do the same thing with a keg as we've been doing with the bottles and be done with it. But that's also expensive, and we've just been trying to find another way for cheap. It hasn't been a high priority.
Yeah,
unfortunately, my 50-gallon cast iron skillet is not available.
Cast iron would be good for it too, with all the heat retention.
That would actually probably help.
We got side story. Family obtained a 55-gallon gumbo cooker It is amazing.
And so that entire process just gets really dicey, not dicey, really flexible in terms of just how you flavor it and how you keep it safe after. I mean, the easiest way to keep it safe after is to just drink it.
Immediately.
Yeah, but for how much alcohol we produce and keep in the house, we don't drink a lot. To be honest, we started brewing in part to make friends.
Yeah, and then COVID happened, so.
Yeah. But yeah, we found it's real easy to go up and talk to people with a, hey, want some alcohol? And you become friendly with a lot of people real quick. And then it turned out we were good at it. And so now we also brew to win. But yeah, we mostly just do it because it's fun. But we've got gallons upon gallons of alcohol sitting around the house that will not be drunk here. And until we start seeing people in person, we're going to have to just wait to brew more, so we don't have to go out and buy more bottles and get a bigger closet to put all our bottles in.
Actually, speaking of bottles, have y'all noticed, or any of the brewers on the chat noticed, a big difference between clear and brown?
The major difference will come into the kind of thing you're putting into it. Brown bottles are going to be more important for beer because, as I mentioned before, I forgot exactly what acid it is, but the primary acid that gives hop its flavor degrades under UV light and turns into actual skunk spray. And so will ruin the beer pretty quickly. The more hops in it, the worse it gets, which is why, for instance, a double IPA should be served in a can and drunk in a can. Don't put it in a glass because the fluorescent light can be enough to start skunking it. But when you're not working with hop cider or hopped beer, hopped mead, which you can do both, you can totally add hops to either if you're so inclined. And then, yeah, that becomes important. But if you're not using that, then a clear bottle would be fine. There is some slight long-term degradation, but if you have a clear bottle that's stored in a box until it's time for it to come out or hit the fridge, then there's really no problem. There's several major cider brands that serve in clear bottles, and most mead is served in a clear bottle because it's not a major concern, and then you can see what you're looking at, and that's a big priority for a lot of people. But even then, Texas Mead Works, a very local group that does very high quality mead, uses brown bottles. It's just what works best for them. I think they might be cheaper.
Possibly just the less clarity content.
Would you stay away from the Grolsch style bottles and then stick with a cork or a cap?
Yeah, so we ran into this problem early on. We didn't want to get a capper and we didn't want to get a corker, and we thought that it would be fine because we'd be drinking quickly. So we started off with screw top wine bottles for mead and Grolsch style bottles for cider. And what we found is that we kept things a little longer than we thought, and the oxidation rate through those containers was a lot higher than we expected. And so our screw top mead was starting to turn within, what, a month? The time that we bottled it, maybe 2. By the time we pulled it out for our second competition, it was already starting to change. And the Grolsch style bottles, especially if you have any kind of carbonation in them, start to leak about at the same rate. So they're a bit of a pain, and you end up losing a lot of what could be really good material. And the bottling equipment isn't all that expensive. You're looking at $20 or $30 one-time upfront cost, plus a couple bucks occasionally for corks. And the process is, more difficult than screwing a cap on. But especially if you can get a buddy over and have one person fill and one person cork or cap, then it goes through really fast.
Right.
Then what I really recommend, like if you just like the Grolsch style for like walking around an event or taking around to friends, Grolsch style bottles are cappable with standard bottle caps. So you bottle it, you cap it with that, and then you leave the lid hanging on the side. And then when you finally open it, you have that as your temporary stopper until you're done with it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I know that.
Same goes for if you get a screw top wine bottle, most of them are also cappable.
Huh.
So it's or at least cork, right? You cork those, and they're still corkable. They're not cappable. But yeah, so it works out fine. Also, you can get some weird moderates. Like you can get 375 milliliter bottles, like the little ones for that are cappable or not, and you can get a screw top. One of our fellow brewers, who I think is the Stargate head brewer right now, uses them primarily because he can cap them and then screw top when it's time to walk around.
Sorry,
Right.
does Stargate have a brewing guild? I thought we were closed.
I think I think it's all online. It might be start. I cannot remember. Who's this? Oh God, I'm terrible with names. I could find him. He's on everything. Ken, Pat? I'll post it in a second. He's a really great guy, and he might even be in this class.
The down in the same area, I think half the sections I was looking at were also closed.
Yeah, I know he's been posting a lot in the Bryn Brewers Guild, which means that there might not be an active like Facebook presence. If you join the Bryn Brewers Guild, which I'll put a link to that in as well, you can find a lot of interaction between brewers. I highly recommend for anyone who gets started, join your local Brewers Guild, especially if you're a member of the SCA. I know we have some non-Scadians who might be on here who are very confused about what we're talking about. But for anyone who doesn't know, we're part of a medieval history group, which is how we got started on all of this. And within that group, there are dedicated brewing communities. And if you join a brewing community, either attached to one of those or just a standard, there's homebrew brewing groups that don't have anything to do with putting on funny clothes or beating each other.
Yeah. Especially if you're in the Houston area, we got breweries everywhere. Same in Austin.
Yeah. Within the SCA right now, there's no in-person events going on, but the Brewing Guild has actually been incredibly active. We've been doing virtual tastings and classes and lots of online stuff. So, and I mean, that's one of the big things that was learned is we had a lot of stuff that people had put together for Gulf Wars, which was this week last year, and then sat on the shelf for an extra year, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was a great event that a great virtual event, I should say, that Nikezi put on, and I think she spent a lot of work putting it together.
Oh yeah.
But it was interesting.
Yeah, I'm planning on doing another one probably at the end of April.
All right.
Yeah.
I need to start bugging y'all more. I'm incredibly novice on all that stuff, so.
Yeah, and because of the distance, it might not be, we might be able to get included on that, but it might also be possible to have people set up something similar in the Houston area as well.
Yeah, I know when I
check.
check.
A lot of moving boxes around to people physically.
Yeah, I mean, completely separate matter. I know I checked probably 2 years ago, and I think both the music and brewers were fairly low active at the moment. And obviously COVID hasn't helped that, but I need to check in those. That's a different matter.
Master Alden is down in Stargate, and he contributed 2 drinks to our last virtual tasting. And he doesn't brew, he does infusions. He did some infused gins, which were very nice.
Ooh, good.
Yeah.
But get on to the Gwlad one. I swear we're at least the most active in the southern end of Onsteora.
Also, I know there are at least a lot of people who are on the event page who are from elsewhere, especially Latin mid-realm. We have people on the list everywhere from Pennsylvania out to California and beyond. And so check your local SCA listings. If you're not in the SCA, then check your local, just Google your city homebrew group. Also, when it comes to getting equipment, I forgot to mention this as part of the class, just check brewing shop or brewing supply store on Google for your city. Chances are you're within 20 minutes of a homebrew shop that you don't even know about because they're tiny, little tucked away in strip malls. They will be your best source for getting just about anything. If they don't have what you want, they can special order or they can tell you where to find it online. They're almost always staffed by incredibly knowledgeable and helpful people. Around here in Austin, we've got 2 different ones, which are both great, SoCo Brewing and Austin Homebrew Supply, and I can't recommend either of them well enough. All the links that I put into the group about where to buy things that could be bought through them are through Austin Homebrew Supply. But just check your local group, and if you find one nearby that's just a little too far but you can still order from, try to order from the local. It's important to keep them going so that you have that person to go through when you say, hey, I want to make this and I have no idea what I'm doing. And chances are they're brewing something similar in the back right now. So highly recommend.
Or just look around the marketplace. I mean, we got, what was it, 2 or 3 kegs for?
Oh yeah, yeah, through Craigslist of all things. When we were looking to get into kegging, we got 2 kegs, a CO2 tank and a regulator for $20 from a guy who was just getting out of the game and just didn't want to do it anymore and wanted to get it out of his garage.
Yeah.
That would be $200 worth of equipment.
Or
Easy.
other homebrewers who are trying to cut back. We got 4 cases of bottles from someone who was cleaning out her garage for like what, $20, $30?
Something like that. Yeah.
Super cheap.
Yeah. So a lot of the equipment that's used is durable, and the designs haven't really improved since 1970. So because most of them just don't need a lot of improvement. So the buying old equipment, as long as it's still sound, is completely viable. But just keep an eye on it in case there's something wrong. But yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to completely derail that. Just realized that was important for the video. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mentioned that Austin Homebrew has a lot of really good sales. Usually you can get used 5-gallon corny kegs for 30 or 40 bucks if you just wait for the sales, which is a good price, especially for ball lock kegs. And they have sales on new equipment as well. Most local homebrew stores will have something similar.
I will say, as far as brewing associations go, I've been overwhelmingly impressed by both the Louisiana and Mississippi-based brewing. Just anyone in that area, really.
Does anyone else have any questions?
So I do have one more. What went wrong with the Argentinian 5, or was it 5 gallons? Did you say that you had of that?
So we're still working out specifics because it happened very quickly. We had done tasting and adjustment and aging and whatnot, and everything was fine with it. When we went to bottle it, it ended up over oxidized at some point during the process. We had slightly sweetened it a bit, so we had to move it into a bottling bucket to mix it effectively. And we think that we hadn't flushed the bottling bucket with CO2, and it had already made one transfer, and then had to transfer again into the bottles, and we didn't flush the bottles with CO2 either. And so it had a lot of air contact through that process. So we think that if we had taken better precautions or bottled directly from the aging container rather than moving to a bottling bucket, we would have had less O2 exposure and not had as much of a problem. But we moved it too much, got too much air in it, and just didn't treat it right.
You tried to flavor it in the bottling bucket.
Yeah, which is
right.
not common for us, but we were just adding a small solution of white sugar and brown sugar to bring it up a little.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Wasn't this also the one that let the airlock run dry on?
No, that was a different one that we ended up not actually brewing. That's the one that failed before then already that we turned into Shraft.
Right.
Yeah, we ended up letting our airlock run dry. I ended up in for those who don't know me, I ended up in a major car accident at the beginning of the year, and we were already kind of taking a pause from brewing for a few weeks just to calm down after the holidays. And so with me in traction for a while, we ended up letting things just be for a bit. And so we didn't fill up our airlocks. One of them ran dry while having mead in it, 5 gallons of mead with the Canadian honey. And we were terrified that something got wrong. We had a fruit fly problem at the time that we were trying to fight. And so when we opened it up, we put it off for like another month after that because we expected to find horribly oxidized mead full of fruit flies and just all sorts of hell. And we opened it up and it was fine because it turns out it actually hadn't fermented. It didn't have enough minerals in it because very pale honey, and we didn't account for that when doing our initial mix. And so it was at like 0.8% alcohol. So not oxidized because there was no alcohol to oxidize, and nothing had gotten into the airlock. So everything was fine. So we added new minerals, and that's what we added the shrimp to because we had already considered that batch lost. We were preparing to dump it out and just be done with it. So what the hell, why not?
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, there are lots of places where things can go wrong because when it happens, it can happen just with that one mistake. So it is important to keep vigilant about things like making an extra transfer or keeping your airlocks dry or making sure your mineral count is right. But for the most part, yeast is very forgiving at the very least. As long as you give it enough food, it'll take care of the rest, even if you put it in a horrible, horrible environment like lemonade.
Yeah.
Full of preservatives. scrolling through the chat real quick to see if there's.
I'll say side note on the longevity of yeast as a baker. Yeah, it'll pretty much survive unless you cook it off.
It's a persistent substance or organism, I should say.
Yeah, just do keep an eye out if you buy a lot of yeast and keep it around for a while. Dry yeast is, sorry, liquid yeast especially, but even dry yeast will eventually just expire. Like it reaches the point where the yeast just cannot survive anymore or cannot stay viable and will eventually end. So check for expiration dates. They actually mean them. If you are working with a yeast that you're on the edge of the expiration date or you're not certain about, that's when you definitely want to work on rehydrating your yeast. We skip it for the most part because we buy yeast fresh off and make sure it's go through, and we tend to overpitch just to be certain. So we don't tend to have any problems with it. But if you're not certain about the yeast and you want to make sure it's going to work, rehydrate it and look for bubbles. If you don't see them within a little while, you'll know.
Yeah, like a little sugar solution, or is it just water generally, or?
Sometimes just water. Some people will use some of their wort or their must and just pour it to the side. All right, that was the other thing that we totally forgot to do today. We were going to pour aside a little bit of our must so we could taste it and make sure that it tasted like something we wanted. We do that for almost everything. And just
grab a little bit in the pipette and squirt it in their mouth.
Yeah, or put it aside and drink it. Because you can taste the different, like most people have a decent memory for taste. It's a very fundamental memory. And so even if it's been 6 months or a year, you can usually connect back to it and think, oh no, that was a lot sweeter then, or a lot drier, or something went wrong, with a surprising degree of accuracy. And so if you taste your stuff right at the beginning, you give yourself a good baseline. That's also typically when we take our SGs. But because this method was what it was, we've forgotten our normal steps. And because it's balloons on top, it's a lot harder to just go in and take it off and take our samples and put it back. Because normally if we forget, we just unscrew the lid and do it and then put it back, no problem.
Right.
A side note about checking yeast. I use warm water. If you use cold water, it just takes longer. So warm water's a bit easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just want to make sure you don't go above the recommended temperature for that yeast, or you'll end up killing them off early.
Room temperature, I should say.
Once because we dissolved sugar in it and we ended up pitching it while it was 95 Fahrenheit, which was way too hot, and the yeast did not like that. It was our first batch of lemonade too, so we were pouring them from that almost dead into an acid bath with preservatives.
And just, where did it go wrong?
Yeah,
That's how lemonade.
to figure out everything that we had done wrong for that one. There's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of error. We are probably about 60% on our success rate, I'd say. But we manage, of those 40% that fail, we tend to save about another 20%, about half of those.
Yeah.
And then we talk as much as we can about the ones that completely fail, because that's where we learn the most, and that's where other people can learn without having to waste that much material and time. So we tend to crow about our failures a lot. And this isn't just our like poor self-esteem or anything. This is the "be warned, ye who follow behind us.
Do not tread in our footsteps." That's probably going to be the next class. Just, hey, here's how I f***ed up. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Now tell me about your f***ups.
Yeah.
That would be a good class. Yeah.
Right?
You know,
That's what I've been saying.
it's one of the things that always irritated me about watching Norm Abrams' woodworking TV shows is that he always goes, yep, that works perfectly. What happens when it doesn't work perfectly? How do you fix it?
Yeah.
Literally any baking show.
Any baking show, yeah, almost all of
But
them.
we already made it perfect earlier today.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the one that's perfect and looks great on TV.
Because
What happens?
I had kind of sworn off brewing with pineapple from the
I had acid.
until someone was like, "Oh yeah, this is pineapple and coconut." I'm like, "How did you do it?" And then they told me the whole process, and I'm like, "Oh, that was stupid simple."
Yeah, it would have been so much easier.
That's what for pineapple. It should be just balancing the acid content, right?
It's potassium benzoate is what it is.
Or packaging, or any stupid simple process that we just didn't do at the time.
Yeah.
I've had a pineapple jalapeno cider, so I'm imagining that's a very odd process.
Yeah, and there's plenty of commercial pineapple drinks. Like we wanted to do it after drinking Schilling's pineapple passion fruit cider. And it's like, oh my God, this is great, but let's go pina colada instead. And so it can definitely be done. It's just, you have to pay attention to it and not just, oh, it's juice, it's fine. It's like any other juice, which is why I make a point of treat every ingredient individually, understand each one's problems because they all have something different.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Austin East Ciders has a pineapple
Yep.
flavor. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a pretty good one.
A little bit more sledge than I like, so I tend to like only drink the top 2/3 because
Yeah.
they leave a lot of the fiber in.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, it's not my favorite of theirs, but
Yeah, oh, that's one of the other things. Whenever we want to start a brew, we tend to start by going to the store and just, what looks interesting? What flavors have people worked well with? We started the rosemary lemon cider thing after we went to a wrestling match at a brewery where they were selling a rosemary lemon white beer that was surprisingly good. Like I bought it like, oh, this is going to be terrible. I have to try it as a joke, and we ended up loving it. It's like, this would taste better in apple juice. We're going to make this into cider, and now it's our most popular brew. Like we made it more than anything else because it's highly requested because it just worked out.
Or
Let's
just
tap Sun Eater if anyone's interested.
or just we made the lemonade to make a what's it called, skeeter pea.
Yeah.
And then that failed, so we just I wonder what can go good with this. Let's try pomegranate, and then that's amazing.
Yeah, because what came out of the end of the lemonade fermentation was bitter and unpleasant, just because fermented lemon juice just doesn't taste very good. But it turns out it goes really well with a select few things. And so we're making another batch of pomegranate lemonade now, but then we're also going to try probably with lavender or violet to balance it out, maybe sweet pea. You just have to figure out what will work with it. And even if it tastes wrong now, it doesn't mean it'll taste wrong when you're done. Because we would not have drunk the lemonade as it came out of the fermenter. We put it in a keg for like 2 months, so we would not have to think about how much we'd messed up. And now it's one of our favorites, and we're doing it again.
interesting.
So yeah, our hardest point in the flavoring process is figuring out what we need to add. Because once we have an idea of what might work, we're really good at figuring out the right balance.
Should have hammered home patience is an important part of brewing.
Yeah, and we still can. We're still on video.
Patience is an important part of brewing.
Yeah. Take your time with it. Understand that things aren't going to be perfect at first. The only time you should ever fully dump a brew is if you know it's infected, and you will know it's infected because you will smell it and your body will say no.
We have almost dumped 3 brews that we put the brakes on, set it aside, and then a month or 2 later, it turned out amazing.
Yeah.
Just because either it fixed itself or we fixed it. So.
Yeah. Because I think
However, during that month, we were completely depressed about it. Just.
Yeah, just, oh God, we've ruined it. What we do? We're terrible brewers. We imposter syndrome. We did one thing right, or oh my God, we got lucky on the first one and the second and the third and the fourth. And like, no, but we can't be good brewers. We're totally bad at this because we messed up once, or this idea didn't work out. No, it's just.
Yeah, and then it turned out great, and then it's just neat.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, take your time with that. Take your time with the originals. And when you get depressed about it, or when things go wrong, just put it aside. Don't dump it. Just let it somewhere where you're not going to think about it for a while. And at the very least, you'll get some aging time, and you'll have some time to think about what might work. And at worst, you just dump it out when you need that keg again, or those bottles, or that fermenter, and just, when it finally comes time that you just have to have it back, you get to make your final decision. But don't ditch it until it's time, unless you make a bottle bomb, in which case get rid of it as fast as possible, or they will explode.
What is the process for flushing your bottles in the bottling process? Like with CO2 or whatever the other methods that you mentioned? Yeah.
So the method that we use right now is kind of unsustainable, and we're looking at adjusting what we do. We got when we first started kegging, we didn't have a functioning CO2 rig. Like we had to get our tank inspected, our regulator fixed a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we needed to get this ready soon because we started this brew like a week before BAM, and we had to serve it. So we went out and got a little like party charger set that uses the same kind of CO2 canisters they use for whippets. And you just hook that into your keg and press the button, and it just pushes CO2 into it at completely unregulated, however much you push in. It's terribly inconsistent. But because of the way it's set up, you can fire it without actually attaching it to anything, and it has a nice little nozzle. So we were just loading up the extra cartridges we had from that and using that to just push air into it. But the cartridges are expensive and it's kind of a pain to work with. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a nozzle that we can work onto our CO2 tank, and just use that as a press button like you would an air compressor. But that one's been a lowish priority, so we haven't done quite as much research as we would as if it was like pressing. Because worst case scenario, we run out and buy another box of chargers and we have a solution. But the device itself is buggy. It's hard to get it pressed in correctly. We've had once or twice where the side ruptured right as we loaded, not the side, the top ruptured as we loaded it in. And thankfully it was contained, but it just vented all the CO2 at once right out the top. And when it does that, it freezes. So I got freeze burns on my hand, even through the plastic casing.
Gloves recommended.
It's got some problems. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it does work.
Oh, gloves recommended.
Yeah.
Any protection.
Yeah. So just little things like that. But once you get the money together that you're willing to buy a CO2 rig, kegging is the easiest thing to do in terms of bottling and dealing with things. It's also really expensive because each keg costs anywhere from $40 to $100, depending on if you go used or new, in what condition you're getting it in, and if you catch it on sale.
And what style?
Yeah, and what style you get. There's two kinds, pin lock and ball lock. All that changes is they have a slightly different height and width, and they have different posts on the end that you actually hook things onto that are incompatible. And so you want to make sure that you pretty much have the same kind for everything, so you don't have to switch out fittings on everything every time you switch over. Ball lock is the more common, which is why it's more expensive, because it's more in demand. Because most of the kegging equipment is taken from soda equipment from the 1970s and 80s. And so there's a limited supply of the used ones. They used to be like $5 equivalent because they were everywhere, but now they're drying up and they're starting getting closer and closer to the cost of a new keg. And so ball lock is everywhere, so they're more expensive. But yeah, so depending on what kind you get, those are expensive on their own. A CO2 tank can be $70 or $80, and then you have to get it filled, which isn't expensive, but it's just the thing you have to do. A regulator can be anywhere from $50 to $200, depending on how nice. And then you have all the fittings, which can add up to $100 pretty quick if you get, for a lot of stuff. And so it's a big initial investment, while bottles are 70 cents each, and bottle caps are about $5, and a capper is about 20 or 30. But it means you have to do all the bottling and the capping, and you have to move them around cases. And when you're dispensing for a large group of people, it's really a pain to keep on handing out bottles and track them and bring them back in so you can wash them and whatnot. And a keg, you can just sit there and dispense. But when you're drinking at home, having to rig up the keg every time you want to get a beer and then rinse out the hoses and whatnot is also a pain. So we do both. Bottles for small drinking and kegs for events. But we use our kegs for bottling, so we can force carbonate them in the keg and then bottle from the keg. So they're always being used. I
have a friend that was into home brewing beer for a while. He's actually the owner of Emerald Tavern Games here in Austin. And
oh yeah.
His gaming room is pretty awesome, by the way. He's got a kegerator, but he's had a lot of problems with it. He bought a specific brand, and it fits, I think, 2 5-gallon kegs in there with the taps and everything. Maybe 3. Actually, I think it may be 3.
Yeah.
But it was expensive, and he's had to have it repaired several times, and it's they can be a real pain. From what I understand.
$500 for a small one, easily over.
Yeah. Oh yeah. His was expensive. Yeah. But he's that's what he's into.
Yeah.
So
it's
we're talking about building one of our own, and just because you can one of the major parts of brewing, if you want to do quick transitions into aging and want to get your yeast out quickly, you cold crash, which is where you cool it down to about 40 degrees or lower. All the yeast clumps together and falls out of solution, and then you can just move the liquid off the yeast quickly and get all the yeast out without having to wait several weeks for it to fall. And to do that, you have to have a refrigerator that you can put your fermenter in.
Right.
Live outside, live where it's cold enough, you can just throw it outside.
Yeah, and so like we had one for a little while, but now that we've moved, we don't anymore. And it's just like, well, it might be worth it just to buy a dedicated fridge for doing that. If we're going to do that, we might as well get one that could serve other purposes. And suddenly, for this thing that we occasionally do, we're thinking about spending $1,000 before we realize that, holy crap, no, we're not that into it.
Yeah.
It's an ice chest, decent investment on that method.
Yeah, you can just get a big ice chest, dump, go to the store, buy $10 a bagged ice.
Yeah. We'll fill half of it with venison and you're paying it off fine.
Yeah. But yeah, we have done a cold crash in cold weather, just because it happened to be the right timing when one of the freezes came by last year, and just was like, holy crap, it's the time, move the fermenters outside. And that was just a lot of fun to have that sort of historical action in there, because that's what they used to do.
Yeah.
Just brew around the right time. When it comes time, you move them outside, and then you move off from there. Especially if you live in, say, Germany. The hard part is keeping them warm during fermentation.
Actually brings up another question. And I think this came up during Nikasi's virtual tasting. But how often do you start a new batch? Because you're looking at a mead taking, let's say, a minimum of a year.
Yeah.
A minimum of 6 months, a year to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you sort of roll in a new batch to sort of have that, I guess, transition to the next one?
Yeah, because of space limitations, we can't really have more than 2 aging at any one time.
Yeah.
Because in addition to those 2 aging, we've also usually got 2 fermenters running with other things that don't need to age or that age very quickly. And we've really only got space for about 4 fermenters and storage tanks before we have to start like raiding somebody's closet. Because we've got a surprising amount of closet space. When we started, we had a giant understairs cabinet that we could just raid for, and we could have fit 30, 40 carboys in there with no trouble. But we now live in a 1-story house with no stairs. So we don't have the understairs space that we can just steal for everything. And it has to be relatively sheltered and enclosed. So we've just stolen all the coat closets in the house and one of the pantries. Yeah. But even with that, we're still rather limited. We'd probably have 4 or 5 going at a time if we had space, but 2 is our limit. And we tend to have usually just 1. We try to keep 2 as much as possible, but like right now, the batch of mead that was going to be our second ended up stalling, and we had to turn it into something else. And so we actually don't have any aging right now. We're bereft until that one finishes up, and then we'll start another batch of mead behind that will be made with shrimp.
Get that shrimp.
Yeah. So there's that, but we almost always have at least 2 things fermenting at any given time. We started making cider because mead was too slow.
Yeah.
And we couldn't learn fast enough from mead. We didn't know what mistakes we'd be making, what was going on, and we just really wanted to have something that we could be done with. And our first cider we made in 1 week.
Yeah. When's that class coming?
Yeah. Eventually.
When's the Applejack class coming?
That one we could do.
That's distilled.
The problem is
that's distilled, right?
So the
Freeze
one,
distilled.
Yeah, freeze distillation.
Yeah.
Technically illegal.
No, technically illegal. Yep. Yeah.
And we're recorded.
Yep. We never said any of this. People talk about pot all the time on YouTube. It's fine. So the problem is 1 week cider requires a cold crash. And we don't have a fridge for it right now until we can get some stuff sorted out. So we can't teach that class until, or I guess we could teach the theory of it, but we couldn't have an example of an actually done 1 week cider until we get our fridge sorted out, which is possible, but we have to make some changes.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of stuff in that fridge.
Gotcha.
Just remember, it's for educational purposes. It's perfectly legal.
Yeah, so that'll be coming through soon. What was I talking about further? Yeah, so we always have several things fermenting at any given time. But yeah, we started on that was it, cider for quickness. We made our first one in a week. Most of ours now we do in about 3 weeks before it hits the bottle. But we aged our pumpkin cider for a month and a half or 2 because there was so much particulate that we needed it to fall through before we started bottling.
Mhm.
And now we've aged the pomegranate cider for 3 months, maybe a little more, because we just didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
And
You move down on the list.
yeah, it keeps on becoming low priority, and as long as it's aging in good conditions, there's no problem. And so that pomegranate is crystal clear, like it is red, but you can it's in a smaller container because it's a smaller batch, but the same width as a normal carboy, and you could draw the pattern on the wall through it with a flashlight on it without any distortion. We are so excited about what that's going to be like. We're probably going to be moving that to a keg Monday. So
Nice.
coming out. There will be reports on the BG Brewers Guild about how that goes. But yeah, so we tend to keep things moving through pretty quickly, which is why we burn ourselves out, because we're always putting something down. I'd say when we're in our peak, we're probably dropping a new batch every 2 weeks. Yeah,
Thereabouts.
1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is why we make a lot of smaller batches too, because cost, and we have to find somewhere to put it, especially since no events.
Right. If you're not giving it out, it takes up space. Yeah.
We just don't want to commit to a larger batch if we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
If it turns out great in a smaller batch, then oh yeah, put that in a 5 gallon
Yeah.
or 8 gallon.
Just let your liver suffer. It'll be fine.
Yeah. It's not about the liver, it's about the taste buds. The liver will hit the same just about any which way.
Yeah, we, no matter what we brew, we have made a commitment that unless it is dangerous, we have to taste a little bit of it each time.
Yeah.
No matter how bad it tastes, we have to suffer and serve penance. So
yeah, and specifically, we get to learn exactly what's wrong with the taste every time we do that. But
yeah, so we have made a commitment to drink some shrimp.
Yep.
And I don't want to commit to 5 gallons of.
But we made 5 gallons of shrimp.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like we already did it in the big fermenter with a full batch. We were going to do a small one, but then we just decided at the last minute.
Yeah, but that's Mead. That's a year Mead. Like that's year Wesley's problem.
We have to taste it when we transfer it.
Yeah, but cider is like 3 weeks.
No, we have to taste the shrimp when we transfer it.
I know, but
I'm just going to ask on the tangent of shrimp,
Mhm.
even if it tastes terrible, please bottle some. I want to try it.
Oh, we will. As long as it's not dangerous, there are lots of people who want to taste it. The reason we have decided to make it, in part because it was kind of funny, was because of the sheer amount of people who demanded that we make shrimp after the joke got made.
Oh, I'm sorry. People demanded this?
Yes.
Almost the entirety of Fit and Goth. Just, well, now you've got it. You've committed. No, it was a joke. No, you're committed.
Yeah. Because for those who don't know, Fit and Goth is a small group just south of Austin that has a very high proportion of brewers, in part because there is a professional, and there's an actual meadery in the area that one of them more or less runs. He is in charge of mead at that winery that has the meadery.
He is the Bjornsburg champion.
Yeah,
Brewing champion.
And the Gwlad brewing
Right.
champion.
Yep.
And he's an amazing brewer and a great guy. His name is Theodric. For those watching the video who don't happen to know, fantastic person, amazing mead. If you ever get a chance to buy from Texas Mead Works, that's his work, and it's great. We've got 3 bottles in the house right now. But yeah, so when he demanded that the shrimp be made as well, I'm like, all right, if you are saying that this has to be made, and all the other mead drinkers around you and mead makers around you are saying that this has to be made, okay, we'll give you the bottle.
You were now committed as well.
We also decided we didn't like the fermenter that the most recent batch of mead was trying to be made in. Like, it's just kind of inconvenient. We bought it for like clearance sale, and now we know why. It's just really oddly shaped. And so we decided that we were going to throw that away when that batch was done anyway. So we had mead that wasn't brewing that we had already planned to ditch, and a fermenter that was already going to be trash. And
a batch that will ruin any fermenter with its smell.
We think. We'll find out.
Fair.
If it turns out
Have
to have a dedicated shrimp fermenter.
if it's any crustacean, it will seep in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
A lot of them are actually resistant to that kind of adjustment, though, because there's several clearing agents like TurboClean that are crustacean based. And so fermenters are made with that in mind.
I need to invest in that more. My gumbo pot tastes like shrimp all the time.
Yeah.
Steel. Steel will hold the flavor.
Yeah, especially if you make shrimp stock for your gumbo,
Yeah.
which I do at whenever I go to the coast. Yeah.
Etouffee, gumbo, it's got all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're working with freeze-dried powdered shrimp, which has less of an aroma than freshly boiled shrimp. In part because it doesn't have the bacterial load. And that's a lot of what the shrimp flavor is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, also side tangent. I mostly do crawfish, so that's a whole different matter.
Yeah.
But more similar than you might think.
Well, yeah, very similar, just thicker shells. You usually pack it down heavy on the flavoring, so that'll just bleed into whatever you're cooking it in.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's the making shrimp and the research behind it, because we've been preparing for shrimp for a year now, was actually how I got a lot of the information about dealing with difficult ingredients, what kinds of bacterial issues can actually be a problem, how to prepare complex ingredients for brewing, even if they are going to be a potential biological hazard, was all in learning how the hell to make shrimp mead without killing ourselves. And it turns out that the problem with shrimp is not that it has an inherent rancidity, but because fish of all kinds, fish and crustaceans carry a particular kind of bacteria, I cannot remember the name, but is the bacteria that makes the fishy taste and fishy smell. And the proteins that crustaceans and fish are made out of are very easy to break down. It's part of being easy for them to make and to exist in salt water, especially, makes them very susceptible to bacterial predation. And so when they are allowed any chance where the immune system of that creature is failing, then they jump on immediately and they start tearing through it really fast. And so that's the real problem. But if you can keep that bacteria away, if you can stall that, then you don't end up with that rancid or fishy flavor. So if they take shrimp and immediately freeze dry them, then that bacteria is killed immediately and doesn't have a chance to reactivate. And as long as it's not a major spore former, which from what I found, it doesn't seem to be, but there's not actually a lot of conversation beyond the fact that it's, it doesn't have a direct cell wall, then it's for the most part just going to be gone. And so there won't be the bacterial risk that comes with, oh my God, shellfish, because that's from a thing that doesn't exist there. But we probably wouldn't do it with anything but freeze-dried shrimp. We talked about doing a boil and using sort of a broth or a tea situation. But even with that, there's not as much of a guarantee that will kill off all the bacteria. And there's a chance of other contaminants. So freeze-dried shrimp, especially freeze-dried ground shrimp, might be the only way that it's possible. But we'll find out if even that's viable or if there's some kind of other problem, because it's still going to be heavily bacterially vulnerable, but so is the must. So
the other option would be to make and pressure can a shrimp stock, because that sterilizes it enough to make it shelf stable.
Yeah, full on autoclave it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the matter of meat flavoring, you're going to want to pressure stock or freeze dry on it, not just going to throw in a slice of Black Forest ham.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. The reason why it works with shellfish is because the fats that are inherent to them aren't rancid. They don't go rancid. Terrestrial meat fat does. So you can make it with shellfish. You can make it even with some kinds of particular fish. Though some of them do have some rancid oils in them. But you cannot make it with normal meat. Not without some serious fat expression.
Yeah, I guess that's probably where I'm hanging up on the fat expression of these. Is there any method of clearing that out, or is that something you just kind of have to look up online, figure out what has what and oversaturated, I guess?
You could clear it, but the amount of time and effort it would take, unless you're just really dedicated to doing it, honestly, bouillon cubes are probably your best way.
Yeah.
That even I'm not 100% sold on that. I still need to do research. But the problem you're going to have is that you have to remove all the fat from inside the meat. So you want to start with a lean cut. You want to at least partially cook it to start liquefying the fat out. Then you need to press it and then repeat and then desiccate it to make sure you don't have a bacterial problem. You have to make sure you don't get a bacterial problem during all of this process in the first place. You're going to have to work in, if not sterile conditions, you're going to have to keep your kitchen prepared for this and ready for this. And you're going to have to work on this probably for several days.
Yeah, because
Oh,
now I'm
you have
imagining I'm imagining attempting a honey glazed ham beverage, but at that point you probably just want to use honey and brown sugar and call it a day.
Yeah, and that's brown sugar in mead tastes great. That's what we were flavoring the Argentinian mead with, was we were adding brown sugar to add some roundness to the flavor, because the molasses is just a good balance. And it was slightly drier than we wanted, so we added a little white sugar to bring the sugar content up. And you know, before it hit the bottle, it was really great.
If you really wanted to mimic the flavor of honey glazed ham, yeah, you could put in the honey and the brown sugar, but then also just a dash of salt, because ham is very, very salty.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Excellent.
but
point.
that would inhibit your yeast action.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially if it's a country ham. Yeah.
Yeah, probably just line the rim of a glass with salt.
Also
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, adding salt as a flavoring is totally cool as long as you're aiming for a non-carbonated beverage. With carbonation, it will start to express that carbonation, in part because the salt will partially recrystallize as it's dissolved. There'll be minor recrystallizations, and that will create nucleation sites for your CO2.
Huh.
Which is why, you know, when you pour in beer salt to your beer, especially they're really big with lots of nucleation sites, it just goes up.
Well, part of the appeal of ham is the fat, though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pork fat rules.
Yeah.
Some people tell me that.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha.
I can't stomach much grease.
I lost my gallbladder, so I understand that a little bit too. So yeah, I have to be careful with too much fat, but country hams are a lot about fat. Well, any ham is a lot about fat.
Mm-hmm.
I mostly use fats in soap making, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But lard does make a very nice soap.
Yes. I've heard that from my grandmother and my mother. Yes. Never done it myself.
So what's actually very interesting is if you express your own lard, that process would probably get you almost all the way that you need if you keep the leftovers as your basis for making your defatted meat. I don't know if there'd be other compounds that would be a problem, and so if it'd still be worth it, but defatting in that method would be worthwhile, because I was stuck on thinking about ways that would preserve the meat as meat and edible, forgetting the fact that it just needs to exist. It doesn't need to be like appealing looking or all in one piece. It just has
Right.
to exist.
And when you're rendering something like lard or suet from the raw thing that they take out of the animal, there's lots of connective tissue and little bits of meat and, you know, other inedible stuff that essentially gets rendered out.
Yeah.
So what I like to do is I like to put the raw stuff in a strainer in a big pot and put it in the oven at like 180, 190 and just let it go until I'm not getting any fat out of it anymore.
Mhm.
And then everything that's left, I mean, I don't have anything to do with it, so I just throw it away.
Yeah. So that same thing, pasteurized and desiccated, might be viable.
Could be. Yeah.
Sounds like the tanner, the baker, and the soap maker need to get together on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually, especially once this initial fermentation is done on the shrimp mead, and we find out if it's gone to absolute hell or not, that might be the starting point that lets you know if pursuing that is even viable. Because if the shrimp mead fails, even with the advantages there, then that definitely, or probably would. There might be other circumstances, but for now it's bubbling along just fine. It smells like shrimp, but it smells like good shrimp.
Yeah.
And we're fermenting. We've got a batch of meat in there. We've got a batch of lemonade in there, and we've got a batch of shrimp in there. So it's honey, lemon, and shrimp. Our brew closet smells great.
Just add some tajin on it. It'll be amazing.
There might end up being lemon rind in the shrimp by the end, like as part of the final flavoring process, because it's a really good combination whenever we open the door.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever? think my final question, we're inching up on 7 o'clock, so it's been a while, but
Yeah.
yeah, one of my at Emerald Tavern, one of my favorite meads is, I think, advertised as being aged in an oak cask that was used for a brandy or something. I can't remember exactly what. Do you have any experience, or have you tried any of that, where you take something, you know, that had something else in it for a while, like a brandy or a bourbon or something, and then try to age inside that?
We have not worked with it, but I do know a good bit about the process.
Yeah.
I can tell you that you end up there are ways that you can emulate it without having to get those casks.
Because they're expensive.
Yeah, oh boy. The biggest thing is there are 3 major components. You have the leaching in of tannins from the oak, because it's almost always oak. You have the addition of just the straight up flavor from the small amounts of that liquid that was in it before. And then you have the fact that wood lets you age with selective oxidation, which is going to make a major difference as well. The only one of those that you lose by reusing a cask is the oak tannins, because most of those will have leached into what was in it already, which actually means that aging in casks that were used for something else will be a less tannic and a less dry experience. So that's going to be the hardest thing you have to replicate. But you can get staves that were used for the same thing that are usually spiral cut to allow for greater surface area, and you can add those as part of your aging process without having to buy a giant barrel and get a lot of the same flavors.
That's interesting. Yeah.
That's what they do in making balsamic vinegar.
They put a spiral cut stave instead. Yeah. So you're actually exposing fresh oak.
Yeah.
As opposed to just the inside of what's already been used.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and you can also get uncut staves as well. And you can get those at your local brewing store. I don't know if I've seen them at Austin Homebrew Supply, but I think it's over on the side with the other actual casks. But at SoCo, they've just got a big rack of them.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
along with the yeast nutrients in that area. Wood chips from the same, they'll chip the staves, or you can just get fresh oak chips. Just don't use the ones that they sell for
barbecue.
Those are usually treated. But yeah, just get the ones that are meant for brewing. If they cost more, it's worth it. There is a slight tax for getting stuff that is meant for brewing, and some of it is useless. Some of it's just a markup because brewers will pay more, but a good bit of it is for actual purposes. So usually best to spend the extra $5.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's good information.
Yeah, but it can definitely be worthwhile. You'll add some very unique flavors to your mead. It will be different depending on exactly what was in it before. You will get direct flavors from that thing. If for some reason if you can't get infused staves, you can actually just add a little bit of whatever that was, like an ounce or so of sherry to your mead. Just pour it in, make a little cocktail or giant cocktail. But yeah, it's completely viable to mix with liquor during the aging process. There's no problem because you're not worried about killing anything. The fermentation is not going to rechange the flavor. The selective oxidation there is the last thing that you're missing, because oak allows for a very specific amount of air to come through that works very well with very certain types of alcohol, which is why it's always oak. Because other woods can add in good flavors, but they have a different oxidation rate, which usually doesn't work out well. So matching the equivalent selective oxidation is going to be really hard and may or may not be worthwhile depending on your mead, because again, it adds kind of a cardboard, like wet cardboard flavor to it. But with the right flavors around it, that can work. Just like Scotch can taste good, tasting like burnt wood and rubber. Like sometimes it just works.
Creosote. Yeah. Yeah. Lefroy, Ardbeg. Yes.
Yeah. And so, like I said before, the biggest thing is figure out what it tastes like and then find a way to say that that's what you meant.
Don't apologize.
There's certainly a way to save it.
Julia Childs said never apologize. So
Fake it till you make it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fake it when you make it.
All right. So it is nearing on 7, and he's going to keep talking until the universe expands and implodes. Y'all have any more questions?
I'm good. Thank you all very much for doing this.
Yeah, no, our pleasure. And yeah, again, this is our first beginner class that we've taught in here. We're probably going to end up teaching this class again eventually for people who didn't get a chance to see it and who the video doesn't work well for. But we also plan on teaching classes on basic cider making, 1 week cider making, actual bottling processes and how to do that safely and effectively.
Class.
Yeah, how to make mistakes, how to make flavors work, how to incorporate reliability, consistency and reliability in your brewing by improving methods and equipment, which I plan on getting a little bit more into on this class, but we ended up with so much else to talk about that it kind of got pushed out. And God, probably a dozen other things. So hopefully there'll be plenty more classes. Probably a good number through this method. Once we get in person, we also plan to teach this class and a few others in person, or just show up and you'll have the ingredients in front of you and we'll just make some mead. So if that's something that, even if you get more experience and you just want to get a refresher, our general philosophy is it doesn't matter how many times, how experienced you are or how many times you've done a thing, always take the beginner class. Whenever there's a beginner class that's offered, we're always in it. Because there's something that we didn't know. There's something we didn't catch.
Or some method that's just so simple that we haven't gotten it.
Yeah. And sometimes, like we've had 1 or 2 where we watch the class and it's like, okay, everything you just said was wrong. It's gonna turn out poorly for you. But at the very least, we learned that that's what that person is doing. That's something that actually works out okay for them. We went to one where we saw that and thought, everything's wrong, and then ended up trying some of their mead later. And it's like, yeah, we were right. So sometimes you just find something weird. But that taught us some things to avoid and some things to work around, and what kind of effects that the methods that they used at the beginning had on the end. Because again, that's the thing that's very hard to tell when you're making your own mead because there's such a large gap. But we were able to taste his starting process and taste his end result within an hour, can find out, oh, that's the flavor that adds. We don't want that. So yeah, always take the beginner class.
Looking forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
This is great. You all have a good night.
You too. Bye.
End. Just end.